The city of Boston and its largest police union agreed on an $82 million collective bargaining agreement this month, and the number isn't nearly as interesting as what's under the hood. For decades, negotiations between the city and its law enforcement and first responders unions has been a tough process, and any concessions were hard-won, if at all, and bad blood often still lingered. More than 20 years ago now, in an incident Boston's politicos still talk about, a firefighter protesting Mayor Thomas Menino's State of the City address actually spat on the mayor's wife. But it might be a new dawn, a new day. The new police contract includes changes to police detail rules and lists criminal offenses that can't just be pushed off to arbitration to overturn discipline, and no one has hurled any spittle so far. During these often contentious negotiations, Mayor Michelle Wu had an ace, a labor whisperer, if you will, up her sleeve. I'm Jennifer Smith.
And I'm Dumcius.
And this is the Codcast, Commonwealth Beacon's podcast about policy and civic life here in Massachusetts. And today we're talking to Lou Mandarini, Boston Mayor Michelle Wu's senior advisor for labor. Lou, thanks for being here.
Hi, Jennifer. Again, thank you for having me.
Well, I'll get right to it. If you can kind of start a little bit by telling us about your background and how you met the mayor.
Well, my background is I come from labor family on both sides and have kicked around the labor movement doing a lot of stuff for a long time. I was a partner, a labor lawyer, a partner here at a firm in Boston called Siegel Reitman, and then ran a series of benefit funds for construction unions, pension, annuity, health insurance. And prior to that, I was a communications flack for the AFL-CIO before law school. So I been around the labor movement a long time, doing a lot of different things. I first met the mayor when we sat next to each other on Senator Elizabeth Warren's campaign in 2012.
So why end up taking this job? And as a side note, by the way, why do all the labor folks seem to want to be journalists first? I would be remiss if I didn't do a hat tip to Mass AFL-CIO head Chrissy Lynch and also National AFL-CIO President Liv Schuler, both of whom went to journalism school. So what happened there, Lou?
Well, I think the great secret is that I think I made $18,000 a year in that journalism job, and I think I paid 90% of my health insurance. So
that'll do it.
I learned fairly on as a worker advocate, not only for other workers but for myself, that wasn't a great gig. So I moved on rather quickly.
No kidding. And so labor has really been on, a lot of folks' minds for the past few years and really in the news, in part because of the pandemic. It's raised a lot of issues about kind of workers' rights and working environments. But even within labor spaces, there's often disagreement about different types of unions, a police association versus a service workers union, the private sector split. And so the Boston Police Patrolmen's Association, which we're going to talk about a bit today, isn't affiliated, for instance, with the AFL-CIO or the Greater Boston Labor Council, unlike, say, the teachers' unions. So for folks who aren't familiar with the different types here, can you explain to a layperson what's different about negotiations with police and first responders unions rather than negotiations with other types of unions?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. I mean, your larger point, which speaks to sort of cultural and historical factors rather than anything specifically about labor law. I mean, that's an age-old debate in the labor movement about whether police unions are part of the labor movement or not, and that has an awful lot to do with the notion that the police are often the ones that are enforcing law and order on picket lines. And so while they may not be aligned with management of a given enterprise, they are not necessarily aligned with people who are striking and all that. We in the Wu administration, we don't particularly honor that because our police and our police unions are as much members of the labor movement as anyone else. And we treat them with the same regard that we do all of our workers and all of our labor organizations in the city, which is that these are workers who do a hard job and they deserve the same candor and forthrightness and directness and bargaining that any other union does.
And on the BPPA in particular, I think for some folks, they were watching the negotiations. Obviously, they were happening behind the closed doors, but there was people whispers about what was happening, and there was talk about the arbitration. So it was kind of surprising to people that a deal was reached in part because of the history of the BPPA. They're going back to the Kevin White administration. Their newsletter had information from the John Birch Society. So What was kind of different about this process versus obviously, the last 40 to 50 years?
Well, I mean, I think we're in a different moment. I mean, for one thing, I mean, I think the most direct situation is, I think, the killing of George Floyd. I think the move to reform on the federal level, on the state level with, the post commission, the city level with OPAT, and a mayor that was elected with an enormous mandate for change. I mean, the climate out there is pushing in a different direction. I think I would say the great thing about, this mayor in this negotiation or any other negotiation is she just does not enter this from an adversarial posture. It's just not, the way she sees this, or sort of questioning the motives of the people on the other side. I mean, there's stuff that we need. There's stuff that we need to get. She was clear. She was forceful. She was steadfast about that over the course of 18 months. These are the reforms we need. We listened to what the police had to say about what they need, the BPPA. And then we had a good faith, give and take. So I think I would say making the most of the moment, which there is a climate and a need for police reform and changing the way we do things. I would say this mayor's just general disposition with respect to the way she approaches bargaining with all unions. And I would say the third piece of it that I think is important, which is unusual, it's not something that the city had done before, was integrating community for the first time into the bargaining process. So, we took meetings with activists, religious leaders, community activists about what they wanted to see in a police contract. And we kept them apprised of what we were doing, what our priorities were, why we had those priorities. We listened to, what those folks had to say about what they wanted to see and what they needed. When we reached the agreement, we briefed those folks. We talked to those folks all along. So I think, it really is the three legs of the stool. I think we're in a moment of reform. We have a mayor that approaches bargaining in a different way, and we have the community involved. I guess I would say a fourth thing: we had a willing partner. I mean, that's pretty important too.
Yeah, that was kind of the place that came to mind next. Was what's the kind of tenor that sort of instinctively seems to form when there's this level of public scrutiny? We're thinking about protests. There were kind of calls for defunding the police in the middle of all of this, even within the city itself, kind of thinking of city councilors were really angling for pretty extreme kind of reforms to the system and the policy. So how do you kind of both take that into account from an external perspective, knowing there are a lot of eyes on you in this moment, and then also kind of try and keep the temperature low at the bargaining table practically?
Well, I mean, I think the one ironclad rule: don't demonize your opponent. I mean, that's just, but if you want to have successful labor relations, and it's two sides, I think, of the same coin, but, don't demonize your opponent. Don't question your opponent's motives. I mean, I actually am slipping here by even saying opponent, but person on the other side of the table, don't question their motives. Don't assume ill intent or, malevolent motives. Sit down, talk about the problems that you have, what you need, what they need, the mutual difficulties that we both have. One of the stories that remains untold in this police contract, or at least it hasn't gotten as much attention as other things. I mean, this longevity program that we've adopted here, that, the fire department has had for a long time, goes to a very specific problem, which is that we've lost a tremendous number of patrolmen in the last 3 years. I think the BPD in the city council hearing cited 22 patrol officers just in 2022 who left to go to the fire department. So I think one of the things that we did when we sat down was genuinely approach the BPPA from a posture of what's going on and how do we solve problems. How do we solve that problem that's a problem for you and a problem for us? So I think that problem solving, creative problem solving, and always assuming, until there's reason not to, that people are operating in good faith is the key to what we do.
I'm glad you brought up that aspect of the contract. I wanted to kind of delve into some of the other stuff too. With details. That's something that's been pursued since at least the Kevin White days, and there were studies even back then about it was a good idea to open up details beyond just police patrolmen. So can you explain a little bit kind of what the contract does in terms of opening up details,
Sure.
and why that's a good thing?
Well, there's actually a lot of reform of the paid detail system. I mean, the thing that's gotten the most attention is opening up to other sources of labor, including, potentially civilians, or including civilians, I should say, not potentially. But it's more important to discuss. I mean, this is a stem to stern sort of reworking of the paid detail system. So, one of the big problem we sought to solve when we started this was the question of making sure that the details that we need covered are covered. And so that is major construction projects. Think North Washington Street Bridge in Charlestown. Think the garage on Boylston Street and Mass Ave. Major projects in very busy intersections and very busy parts of town. Major events. So Red Sox games, TD Bank North Garden, concert venues, that kind of thing. There are just higher priority details that need to be covered that historically in the city haven't been covered. Because the way it works with the 4 police unions, I mean, prior to this contract, is that, officers who want to do details in their off time get to choose. They get to choose which details they work. So what we've done here is change that such that there are type 1, which are higher priority details that have to be worked first, and then type 2 details, which are everything else. So the type 1s are, those busy intersections on what are called red line streets. There are events of 5,000 or more people, and then there are emergencies. So those have to be done first, and we hope to bargain the same reforms into the other 3 police contracts. And then the other piece of the detail reform, there are 2 other big pieces. The second is the hierarchy of labor. So, this is a recognition that by most estimates, 40% of details don't go worked. They go unworked. So, clearly we do not have enough officers to staff all the details. We haven't had in a long time. And so opening up the detail system to other folks who can do it, other folks who can be trained, other folks who can earn, a decent amount of money. So civilians have gotten all the attention, but, our municipal police here in City Hall, our municipal security guards, that's a remarkably diverse workforce here in City Hall. The opportunity for those folks to be able to pick up a detail or 2 a week is life-changing. So it's not only civilians which have gotten the most attention, but BHA police have the opportunity to do it, potentially college and university police, retirees. I mean, the notion of the hierarchy is ensuring that we have enough labor to actually support the new system that we've built, which is that the high priority details need to be covered and covered first. And the way to ensure that is to make sure that you have enough labor to do it. And then the third reform, I think, with respect to paid details that's worth flagging is ending the concept of a roll-up. And so that is a situation on a detail, where a detail ends early and an officer can pick up another detail and effectively be paid twice for the same amount of time. With respect to the detail system, we ended that, with this negotiation. And that's just that was a practice that, bothered a lot of people, and justifiably so.
So what was making some of these detail changes such a sticking point? Some of these are building on reforms and changes that have been in place for more than a decade, but have kind of struggled to be implemented. So what was the tension there?
Well, I think the tension, look, I think it's a bedrock principle, for unions, whether you're a steel worker or a laborer or a carpenter or a longshoreman, unions exist to protect their members and protect the work they do. Often in other settings, it's called jurisdiction. I think the notion of sort of losing the opportunity to do work or losing jurisdiction for stuff that you do, it's a difficult one for unions. But that crashed into a particular difficulty we have here in the city of Boston, that we have details that are going unfilled. It's unsafe for our work crews. It's unsafe for our own city employees. It's unsafe for everyone to have a situation where, these details that need to be filled are not filled. It's, it's disruptive in terms of traffic for, people who want to get around town. So the notion that, this is our work. And, there was in the collective bargaining agreement a prohibition that anyone other than a sworn officer could perform this work. There's a city ordinance that a sworn officer has to be at any construction or utility detail. I mean, that sort of like, that is our work, and we own it, crashed into the reality of where we are in the city of Boston. And that's the wonderful thing about, this mayor who staked out the territory and enunciated the principles and enunciated the goals that we were going after, is that, we can't have these debates that just chase our tail and go nowhere. I mean, saying it's our work, saying that nobody else can do it, when that means that the work isn't getting done, details aren't getting filled, things, we're compromising the safety of workers and our own workers and construction workers around for the principle that, it's there. Those kind of nostrums are what, this mayor is great at questioning and probing, and how we made the progress we made.
I want to ask about another aspect of the contract, arbitration. But before this contract, what did the process look like if an officer was terminated for, let's say armed robbery or one of the things on the list? But I'll let you kind of lay out the before and after that the contract is implementing.
Yeah, I mean, this one's a little bit more direct, which is to say, since the principle of just cause came into the BPPA contract in 1994 in a JLMC award, there have been no limits on the ability of an outside arbitrator to second guess the implementation of discipline by the police commissioner. So that is to say, whatever the offense is, just cause is a wide-ranging concept that brings in a lot of stuff. So, there were no limits, I think, is the direct answer to your question. And so that was what is different. Now we have a list of serious offenses that we remove the possibility of going to arbitration. So I think the direct answer to your question is there were no limits before, and there are now limits.
So it's a list of about 30 offenses, but there's things that aren't on there. I believe the city council, when they had a hearing on the contract, they brought up, domestic violence is not on that list. Is that something that could be added in the future, in future negotiations, or in terms of leaving stuff out, leaving stuff in? Where's that line for future contracts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's 100% our intention to grow that list, and to reach some of the things that we didn't necessarily reach in this. I mean, I should say, that list is not, that is not the list that says everything else is okay. That's the list that we were able to reach through collective bargaining. And, the notion of collective bargaining, when we talked about dealing with our labor partners, if I wrote the book, would I have a list that was a lot more expansive? I mean, if there were no limitations on what we could and couldn't do, and we didn't have to deal with a bargaining partner and the give and take of collective bargaining, would we have had a lot more stuff on that list? Yes, we would have, unquestionably. But the process of collective bargaining is a give and take. It's a situation where you get as much as you can, you take it in piece by piece, and you plant a marker for the future. I think what is important to know about this list and this collective bargaining agreement is that this administration has laid down the marker that reform will be conducted through collective bargaining. We got as much as we could, in this particular contract, and that is represented in that list of offenses. There certainly are things that aren't on that list of offenses that we're going to pursue in the future, but that is a pretty robust start to a situation where there were no limitations whatsoever prior to the time we started.
And how much of what ended up making that list was informed by, again, sort of the public eye here? Many of them dealt with, for instance, crimes against a child. So in thinking about sort of what kind of made that list first, were there any sort of public mandates that you were really keeping in mind at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to give the impression that the list was entirely about sort of overturning post, after the fact cases that we lost. I mean, that's not what it was about. I mean, it was about a much larger principle, which is that, the police commissioner has great authority under the police commissioner statute. The police commissioner and, the command staff know the most about what kind of police department they want to build and what's important in an officer, and, what is, the kind of officer that we don't want to be here. So, I mean, there are two things. I mean, yes, there are particular cases, as the mayor cited in all of her comments over 18 months, and certainly when we unveiled, this contract, the case of Patrick Rose looms large in the history of the BPD. I mean, that's a situation where that officer had a sustained finding back in 1996 and was nonetheless allowed to continue in the department. I mean, it is the kind of thing that, in this day and age, shocks the conscience that was allowed to happen. So our animating principle in what we were doing here, I mean, we always had that case in the front of our mind with what we were doing. That kind of a situation can never happen, just can't happen.
So we're kind of getting towards the end here, and you've been involved in negotiations for a long time over your career. How has your approach evolved over the course of all these negotiations, and especially with, I mean, you came in with more than 40 contracts that expired. So especially in this 2-year period, it's been a lot. So can you tell us a little bit about how your approach evolved?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the approach evolved from the standpoint of contract negotiations. In our administration, contract negotiations are not about brain dead combat. We're just not going to do that. That is not what the mayor is about. The mayor is about problem solving. The mayor is about reform. The mayor is about bringing the change that she promised. And so I think the thing is that we were clear. I mean, we were clear about a whole bunch of principles. I mean, we were clear, with this, whether it was the teacher's contract or the school bus driver's contract or the custodians and BPS. I mean, every contract we sit down to negotiate, the BPPA, Local 718. We're clear about what we need. We're clear about what our goals are. We're also clear that these workers, I mean, whether they are police or they are firefighters or they are, parks department workers or health commission workers. I mean, these are the people who make the city run. I mean, that's the principle from which we start all of our collective bargaining negotiations, is a respect for the fact that these people get up every day and they do a job that makes the city of Boston run. And we never forget that when we sit down at the table, that these are people who are out there making it happen. And I would also say that, being clear about the principles, being clear about what it is you want to achieve. I mean, I'll cite in the BPPA contract, it was a document that the mayor promulgated when she was running, a blueprint for collective bargaining reform, through police contracts. We achieved in this contract several different aspects of what the mayor had proposed back when she was a candidate. So I think clarity of what you want to achieve. We had a plan, we had a policy. I think, using the bully pulpit throughout the 18 months to be absolutely clear. I mean, the mayor never wavered on the question of, we will not sign a contract that does not have fundamental reform, and then actually being able to deliver it. So, I mean, I think this is an enormous success because of the leadership we have. We had a willing partner. We had a good attitude about the way we do collective bargaining, but, we also have a leader with a moral compass who knows what she wanted to do, and we were able to do.
And I think Gin flagged this to me before we started recording, which I appreciate, is I think you've said at some point, the part of the principle here is you never really leave the table. You just stay at the table over and over and over again. So what is next on the table here? If you're trying to see what the next kind of joust is, or not joust, if we don't want to frame them as opponents, what's next? Is it expanding kind of the list of possible offenses that can't be kind of dispensed with through arbitration? Is it another major union contract? If folks are watching Boston, what should they watch?
Well, I mean, I think certainly with respect to this contract, we're going to do the same thing we did, which is we're going to talk to the police, we're going to talk to the community, we're going to talk to religious leaders, we're going to talk to activists. We're going to huddle up with our own policy folks, and we're going to determine what we all need and how to balance the equities and what comes in the next contract, which we're going to have to do in about a year. So I think with respect to the police contract, I don't want to presage necessarily what we're going to do. We certainly have some ideas on things we want to achieve, but we did promise an open and expansive process with a lot of stakeholders, and we fully intend to vindicate that. So I don't want to get too far on a limb about what we're going to do without that opportunity. But I mean, I would say, writ large on collective bargaining, I think our point of view is that collective bargaining is more a state of mind than a process. I mean, one of the things that Boston and various administrations have made the choices they've made, and they had the reasons for doing what they did. But I mean, I would say one of the things we want to get away from, and the mayor has enunciated, repeatedly, is being able to settle contracts before they expire. I mean, this is one problem that, the city and public employers in general, I mean, a contract will expire, its various terms will continue in force, and, you'll blow through a contract deadline by a year before you start negotiating. It's just, look, it's for recruitment, for the morale of the workforce, it's a bad way to do business, because the rent, for our city employees, or a gallon of milk, is not waiting for us to get our act together to do collective bargaining. Folks need a raise when they need a raise. And that's an important piece of what we're doing. I mean, we're still digging out of a hole that we inherited, as Gin, I think, referred to, or possibly you, Jennifer. 48 contracts when we walked in the door were expired. No mayor's ever faced that. But we're still digging out of that hole because, all the ones we did in the first year that we were here were already 2 years gone by the time we reached them. So they're expiring again. So we're getting ready to do that. And in this next round, where we're going for a longer period, it's our goal to reach these, get people paid, and then make sure from here on out, to the extent that we can do it, that we never let a contract expire again without another contract ready to go. It's just a good way to treat your workforce. And that's what this mayor's all about.
Thanks again to Lou Mandarini for joining us on the podcast, and thank you for listening. I'm Jennifer Smith, here again with Dumcius. Our producer is John Gee. Leave a rating and review wherever you're hearing this now if you ever want to help other folks find us, and email codcast@commonwealthbeacon.org if you ever want to get in touch directly. We'll be back in your ears next week. May your holidays be bright.